Hey, hello world history students, and welcome to our first lecture for the Greek and Roman Unit 2. And today we're going to be looking at Greek city-states. And so you should have your outline that I gave you in class, or if you lost it, there's a place on Google Classroom where you can print a new one. But as you listen to this lecture, please track some of the main points on your notes and be ready to discuss those tomorrow in class. So let's jump right in. And you'll notice there's always three parts and then a so what conclusion. Okay, here we go. So first off, let's talk about city-states. So in ancient Greece, it was pretty much organized similar to Samaria, where there was not a united Greek empire, not yet. We're going to get to Alexander, but each city, individual city, like the Mesopotamian cities of like and Uruk and Eridu and stuff like that, they were like their own governing entity, their own countries. So they were independent, but they were united by their culture. And they're especially united by their language, the fact that they all spoke the same language. So thought of themselves as different states or different countries, but again, they had this worship the same gods, a lot of the same religious practices, and then of course the same language. In fact, the term they used for barbarian, kind of meaning an outsider, or really means somebody we don't understand, because barbarian meant somebody who doesn't speak Greek. So as long as they spoke the language, again, they were kind of into the circle, even though they weren't a united empire or giant united nation as the country of Greece is today. And it was interesting because you had all these different city states and they used all sorts of different types of government models. There were monarchies, there were oligarchies, there were democracies, they were kind of mixes in between. And we're going to be looking at those different types of government in this lecture. The nice thing was, with all these different types, it was almost like a bunch of experiments where they were constantly trying to come upon what they saw as the best form of government. These are just some of the most famous or prominent ancient Greek city states. Athens is probably being one of the most famous that we'll be talking about. They were notoriously a democracy in which people had the right to rule. Sparta would become the other powerful, and it's also one of the more well-known city states because of movies like The 300 and the Battle at Thermopylae. They were an oligarchy in which they were ruled by a council of elders and generals because they were a highly militarized society. And I won't go into each one of these, but again, a lot of monarchies, and each you can kind of see like you'd have flags. Each city state kind of had their own emblem representing their independent nation, even though it was pretty much a city and some of the surrounding farmland around it that constituted that city state. Okay, just a map to kind of give you a picture of the region. This is the Aegean Sea, just off the Mediterranean. That you have Greece there on the left, Asia Minor, or what we call Turkey, today on the right. You can see up in the top hand corner of Asia Minor the city of Troy, where we talked about the Iliad last week, and you can just see the number of city states. Highly dense. You can see they were largely a naval nation because they could island hop all over that Aegean Sea, and you got different city states located on each island. Um, I guess I can't point to it, but Athens is down on that peninsula. But anyway, but you should see the diversity of these different city states. And again, they're on the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea where modern day Greece and Turkey meet today. Okay, so key aspects of the city states. There's five central city kind of locations slash institutions that you want to be aware of. That as different as the different city states were, they would have this in common. Typically, they had what is called an acropolis, and that was a fortress or kind of the center of the government and the religion. It was usually a high place. It was usually a place of fortification, so that in times of danger, via invasion or war, the people could go there for protection. Again, they often the center of religious sacrifices and religious festivals. The government a lot of times used the Acropolis because it was a fortress to where it kind of like a bank, basically Fort Knox, where they would keep all the wealth of the city state. And then you had the Areopagus. This was where the meeting place. So this is kind of where you would this was kind of like the Facebook, but a physical Facebook where everyone could get together and discuss the politics or discuss the issues of the day. Where if it was a democracy, you could vote, or at least where different debates or announcements or proclamations could be made. Then you had the Agora or the Agora. That was the marketplace. So that would be that's your downtown. That's where again the trading and the businesses would set up and commerce would take place. Then you had a gymnasium. Again, the we talked about arete and how that encompassed all the different aspects of life, including physical health. And so Greek city states tended to all have gyms. like many modern nations today, where people go and just exercise and train because they believed as much as school was important for the mind, and work was important for commerce, you needed to take care of your body, and so they usually had a gymnasium or a gymnasia. And then you had an amphitheater, and that was an outdoor theater where plays could be produced. Theater was extremely important. It was kind of the number one form of entertainment, um, where something could be acted out, like the Iliad, potentially, if it was turned into a play. But almost every Greek city-state, we find that they had these outdoor amphitheaters, where, again, for a lot of times for religious festivals, the city would gather to watch various plays. Here's just a map of what we're discussing there. Uh, a foot map, you could see the city wall, and you can see various gates leading into the city and the roads heading off in other directions. Where then you had the Acropolis, those lines that are kind of all dashed where it says Acropolis. That's indicating that there's a mountain there, that it's steep, and so that is that raised fortress area. The Areopagus, that actually is going down, almost like a bowl, where people then could gather together, and almost like kind of like an amphitheater, but where people could see each other and, again, have those debates and have those moments of voting and political gatherings. And then, of course, the agora. You have the gymnasium. So this is just one example, but this is what was repeated time and time again in these various ancient Greek city-states, also known as the polis, which we'll talk about in a moment. Just a 3D cartoon rendering of what you might have. Again, the city-state wouldn't only be the walled city. It would include the farmlands around it, because there's no way you're going to feed everybody. You had most of the members of a city-state would actually oftentimes be farmers, and then some who actually lived within the city walls. And if you were lucky, you had access to the ocean, and you might have a port, as depicted in this illustration. And of course, that high raised region in the back, that is your Acropolis, your fortress. Okay, so let's talk about something called the polis. That's an ancient Greek word, polis, and it just stands for the people. If you know the word politics, that is derived from the getting together or the organizing of people. And so when you have a city-state, they would often refer to the polis. And while the polis could kind of refer to the city itself, it more specifically meant the people. The gathering of the people who live in that, or community might be actually a good way to name it. It's the community of the people who run and organize or live within that particular city. So it kind of means city in a way, but it more specifically refers to the community of people. And the Greeks really thought hard about what the nature of this gathering, or how people should be organized. They kind of had a logical track that started with the most basic polis, or, well, I won't say polis, but the most basic relationship or organization of human beings was man and woman. You had to bring men and women together, because then that's how you had children. You would get offspring and you'd get procreation. And then they said, well, you can't just have just men and women and their children. You wanted to have a village. That would include the extended family. And that provided not just, again, one person and their children, but you'd have protection. You'd have better help in terms of different division of labor and producing food and having a culture. And then the polis took it a third step farther, where you wouldn't just have one extended family forming a village, aunts, uncles, cousins, and all that, grandparents and all that, beyond the nuclear family, but then you'd have multiple families agreeing to live together. And that would form usually a city-state or a polis. And they said what you got from having those multiple families was this element of justice. And when they say that it produced justice, it meant that you might have a way to get along in your marriage, that's hard enough, right? And then you have a way to get along within your extended family, a little trickier. But even then, families are going to bump up against families, and you're going to have to interact with another family. And that's where the polis came in. A polis was an organization of those multiple families, so that they could partner together in making sure justice was served, that they treated each other right, that people were not being abused, not taking advantage of, basically coming up with laws and justice systems and a form of government to basically help human beings get along and partner together in terms of protecting each other, and helping each other live a better life. That's what a community is. And so that's what they saw the purpose of the polis. Marriage was great, produced offsprings. Villages were fine, protection, food, and culture, but you needed a polis, you needed a government in order to have true justice and help all these different entities of human beings learn to get along, because that was what was ultimately going to allow you to live a happy life. And the Greeks, being humanists, seeing the potential and the opportunity and the goodness of being a human being, they're very much thoughtful of how do you live a good, happy life. A key aspect of the polis is the fact that human beings, among all the other animals, had the ability of speech. They said what really brought the polis together, what really brings people together, is their ability to communicate. Why would we be able to talk if we weren't supposed to live in community? And the Greek word for that was logos or logos, and that was our ability to think and then express our thoughts as words. So that was the other key thing, is that the fact that you can speak shows you that you have the ability to think and to reason. We talked that they really value reason. Well, the outward expression of mankind's reason, at least in its best form, is our ability to talk and interact and use our words. They also said that it was the power of words to declare justice and injustice. They said on the previous slide that the whole point of having a government is to help us to get along and make sure we're protecting each other and not abusing each other, because we all have competing interests and competing families and competing priorities. But it was then our words that allowed us to say, that is right. No, that is wrong. That is just. That is unjust. And so our ability to speak, and again, I talked about earlier how the Greeks valued rhetoric. They said really it was our ability to speak that we know good and evil. That if we're just silent, and if we weren't able to communicate, the ability to really manifest what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil, wouldn't be able to do it. But that human beings, in how we speak, we declare right versus wrong. And so the polis is, it has a very, again, it's deep, powerful thoughts. It wasn't just, oh, we live in a city together. Oh, we're going to trade together. Oh, we have to have some laws so we don't kill each other. Though that's getting close. But they said, no, it's when we live together in a polis and we talk back and forth and we debate, we negotiate, we compromise. We say, what is the right punishment for what just happened here? Or what does this person really deserve? What is the right price for this? How should, and you debate and you manage and you create something together through all of your mutual logoses, your mutual, rationalities, that was a great moral project, that was kind of the greatest moral project of human beings to create a moral order. So they didn't just see the polis as a city, they saw it as human beings living together at their highest ability to coordinate and debate and to find truth. Not just alone, some scientist in a lab, but no, as social creatures saying, hey, what is the right way to live and the right way to get along? And then kind of just extending that is, again, they really saw government as a moral project. They really saw that the way we organize ourselves and protect ourselves and live together is a reflection of, and even an impact on our soul, on our character. And that they would say, you need a good government because the government is going to affect people's character. And that if you have a corrupt form of government, a corrupt polis, a polis not based on logos, not based on reasoning and proper speech, then you're going to create citizens who are wicked. And then they would say vice versa. But you also then need to cultivate your inward virtue, because only people of internal virtue could then help produce that moral government. And so they saw it as this two-way street that were mutually reinforcing. Good people make good government, but also, and good governments make good people, and bad people make bad governments. And if you pick the wrong government structure, you're going to start producing bad people. So they saw it as, again, a very kind of a moral mandate to say what is the proper way to govern these city states, the polis. And I've already stated it once, but kind of we get this because this is in the Declaration of Independence in the United States, where we say the government is for the people, by the people, and of the people. And if the government ever betrays its calling to protect our rights, we say we should be able to change our government. We should be able to alter or abolish it. Go read the Declaration of Independence. But that's a principle that our founding fathers took from these Greek polis, where they said, Aristotle, the kind of the grand student of Socrates and the student of Plato, he said the polis exists for the sake of a good life. The whole point of having a government is that government should be aiming towards helping people have a good life. And so they put in a lot of energy and a lot of debate saying, well, then what is the right kind of polis in order to create the best life? And that's just our final point here. Types of governments. And again, the debate that we'll be talking this week, which one is the best? This is one of the great contributions of ancient Greece in terms of, they spent a lot of time thinking about the nature of man. They spent a lot of time thinking about what is then the right way for mankind to reason their way, not only towards scientific truth or not only towards historical truth. We talked about Thucydides and Hippocrates and Socrates, but what is the best way to run a government? And so we have three different specific types that we're going to discuss. Leave the thinking to us. We have the oligarchy, which is the rule by a few. we have the decide together, vote it, that's the democracy, and then you have a crown representing monarchy. And so the question is, so if the purpose of political organization or the polis or cities is which one's going to make us most happy? So I would just look at each type and the kind of the pros and cons. Oligarchy, that's a rule by the few. A lot of times this would be the elders. Sometimes this would be the very wealthy and powerful. I mentioned that in Sparta, this was the military generals because the military was the most respected and powerful members of that society. But it's a rule by a few. Kind of think of it as a wise council. Um, the pros of this approach is that it usually tended towards wise leadership. That if you the people who got onto this oligarchical rule, they usually were experts in some sort of field. They had something to commend them to that position. They'd earned it through merit somehow, and so you would have some sort of wisdom to the leadership. It also potentially offered advancement. That again, you might have the goal of one day, if you're just a common citizen, to becoming part of the oligarchy. So kind of a motivation or a goal, and just the idea of counsel, the idea that there wasn't just one mind trying to develop, make decisions, but that there was at least a council of a certain size, corroborating, sharing ideas, and coming up with the best decisions. The cons of the oligarchy were greed, where that again, this kind of the small percent, whether it be 1%, 10%, whatever minority percent of the population is in control, they could potentially use the government, use the polis and the laws for their own benefit, and kind of enrich themselves. There could kind of become an emphasis on money. And what that means is that rather than having people on this in this position of ruling based on their merit, maybe it's just because they're rich. So again, maybe they're not wise, maybe they're not virtuous, maybe they don't make good decisions, but they bought their way onto it, and that could be end up being a corrupting influence for that city state. And then of course jealousy, in that you could have the common people or the majority becoming jealous and embittered and potentially rebellious towards that ruling minority over them. So it kind of fosters a have and a have not potentially mindset. And then for each of these types, the Greeks, and particularly Aristotle, had, I think, maybe it was actually, let me say Plato, but maybe I'm wrong. Aristotle or Plato, they said when it becomes bad, what do we call it? When it's corrupt, when it doesn't go right, what does this type of government become? Well, an oligarchy, which is supposed to be kind of a rule by the few and few wise, merited ones, it becomes an aristocracy. And when they say aristocracy, they basically mean the rule by the very rich and powerful, and that they, and what's implied there is they're in power forever, and that if you're born into the aristocracy, you get to rule not because you deserve to or you're good at it, but just because of where you were born. And if you're born out of it, then too bad. You're never going to be able to move your way into it. And that the two sides were basically the few, the aristocracy, their whole goal in ruling is to keep everybody else out of the positions of power. So they said, watch out for oligarchy. If it's not run right, it can turn into an aristocracy. And a lot of people point to something like medieval or even late colonial Europe, where again, people had titles and power and authority in government simply because of the money and their position at birth. Second type, democracy. Demos, the Greek word for people, so rule by the people. This is, and again, the form of democracy that they looked at was direct democracy, so that a city-state was relatively small compared to some of our cities today, so that people, whoever was defined as a citizen, could actually vote and directly make the laws and directly run the city. It's not like where they would elect representatives and those representatives ran the government. No, the people themselves would gather at the Areopagus, and they would vote on laws and decisions and policies to be carried out. During war, it would be the average citizens choosing what to do in the next stage of the war. So we usually sometimes think of this direct democracy. And you can see, as I describe that, that's not what we have here in the United States. We do not have a direct democracy here. But that is what, when they had this set up in ancient Greece, that's what they were talking about. The pros of this, right there: equality, everyone gets to participate; liberty, everybody is free to again participate and has an equal say in terms of what's going on, and they can create the opportunities that they want. If they want a policy change, they can present that at the Areopagus and try to make a vote on it. It has high participation; everybody's involved. Everybody can partake of the decision making. Sometimes that could be a little chaotic, but again, it oftentimes led to an engaged. It can lead to an engaged and I was going to say intelligent, but an engaged and thoughtful and people who care about their community and what's happening to it. The cons is it could become frivolous. It could become where the people just are voting themselves what they want. So in other words, we vote for the government to give us more money. We vote for the rich to pay for all these things for the poor. We vote for something that's just a really bad decision. Because again, when you have if everybody's voting, do they even know what they're talking about? Are they experts? Should they really be the ones? Should we be listening to everybody and making these decisions? It could also lead to complacency, where they just assume that because they have the power to vote, they have the liberty to engage, but they don't take it. They don't engage in it, and so just the very few the very few who are engaged run everything. And basically, it's the idea that nobody votes. I have the right to vote, but I don't use it, and they take it for granted. You can have factions, so that's where you get basically you might think of political parties, where you get different groups organizing, and those groups become very come into a lot of conflict with each other, and they begin to smear each other, and people begin to, rather than see each other as fellow Spartans or fellow Athenians, they see themselves as, oh, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're an enemy, you're a pro this, you're a con that, and they could almost turn into street warfare if it devolved bad enough. And then you get this idea of demagogues, and a demagogue is somebody who, through the power of emotional speech, could sway the masses, where again, they vote for policies, they vote for decisions, not because it actually makes rational sense or they truly believe it or even understand it, but they were very persuaded by that powerful speaker. And this was a huge problem in ancient Athens. And I'd say you could consider mass media today in our own ability to vote, and how much our voting is not based upon our actual understanding of issues potentially, but what do we want personally, frivolity. I'm not going to participate because I just don't care. My life's good. It doesn't matter if I vote. Faction, I'm voting for it just because my party agrees with it, or I'm voting for it because it just makes me feel good. What they said, their words, I have an emotional response, and so I'm going to vote for that person or that idea. It sounds good. And the corruption, they said, of a democracy was anarchy. That when you had too many people with too much power fighting in faction and without good policy and without true wisdom, you have nobody's in charge. It's chaos. And we're going to be reading Plato's Republic, in which he's going to address this issue. And again, another way of saying anarchy is just mob rule. Whatever the 51% want, whatever they're fired up about, there's no wise counsel, there's no checks and balances on their power. It's just whatever the majority of people want, it's going to happen. Just imagine running a classroom not on a teacher direction, but running it on, well, what do the students want? How do they feel today? Let them all decide just on a raw vote. Imagine what they might do to the teacher. Imagine how much they might actually learn. Imagine what they might do to certain classmates that aren't popular. It could get ugly really quick. And that's one of the dangers they saw in democracy. And finally, you have monarchy, mono, rule by one. And so this was a very prominent one within ancient Greece, and obviously probably the most prominent throughout human history. The pros of a monarchy is speed. Decisions can be made very quickly. Maybe you've ever, as a family, you're trying to make a decision, and the parents, hey, what does everybody want? What does everybody want to eat? Or what do we want to do today? Well, if it's too democratic, it takes a really long time because everybody has to make their argument, and then things have to be decided, and nobody can agree. If it's just dad or mom saying, this is what we're going to do, and you're going to like it, like a monarch, then things, whether you like it or not, at least it happened quickly. And at least you have a clear direction in terms of where you're going. You're united underneath that one direction. Everyone knows, hey, they're the leader. We're going to follow them. There's strength in that. There's strength in having an example to follow and having somebody you can look up to as your leader. And it also, kind of along with unity, brings loyalty. Because not only when you think of yourself as a member of that community, you look to that person, and that person's a figurehead, whether it's Queen Elizabeth or Alexander the Great or whoever your king is, and you say, okay, I identify with that person, and it brings kind of a loyalty and a strength and a speed and a direction to the community. The cons, well, oppression. What if you don't like that one person? What if they have all the power and they're abusing it? What if they have, what if they don't, aren't doing what's in the best interest of other people, or they're a poorly equipped ruler? There's fear, because if you cross that monarch, you're a goner. You could be punished or killed or exiled if they don't like it. And then there's just kind of a de-emphasization of the individual. So where there is strength and unity and cohesive direction, you're looking at the larger body. You're not looking at, well, what about the individual people? What about their dreams? What about their desires? What about their happiness? Are individuals being are they having a good life, or are they being kind of swallowed up in the dreams and direction and the edicts of that one ruler? And the corruption that we would say a bad monarch or a bad monarchy would be what we call tyranny, or a despot or despotism. And so notice there's an argument to be made for all three forms, and that's something we're going to talk about in class. But that's why it's such an interesting and complex issue, and that the Greeks would have said this is a key part of human life. I got to be a nice person and not lie and not cheat, not steal, and achieve arete. But we as a community, what is our arete? What is the best way in which we can organize and govern ourselves together? All righty, you made it. So what? The Greek city-states. Well, one, it's important to study politics and government because it's a key part of our lives. We've had such a great government here in the United States for so long. We kind of just think, oh, living life is easy. Living life is natural. This is just how it is. No, we as Americans have been given a certain polis. We have been given a certain structure in which we've organized ourselves that frankly works really, really well. That's this whole idea of Western civilization, not taking it for granted. And we need to kind of look into politics and government, just like the example of the ancient Greeks, because it was their work and their rational thought and investigation into these things that created a model from which our founding fathers bequeathed to us what we enjoy today here in the United States. Also, just emphasizing the polis is a part of nature. It's not something human beings, hey, let's have a government. But there was something natural about, again, men and women producing offsprings, villages of extended families, and then different families. How are they going to get along? Are they just going to kill each other, warfare, raiding, or is there an actual natural way they can use their logos, use their reasoning, their communication skills, just talk to each other to form a way in which they can coexist that will bring each of them the maximum amount of happiness? The Greeks kind of basically thought of it as there's an explanation for the movement of the stars. There's an explanation for a natural explanation for disease. There's a truth to all history. They believe there is a natural law to government. If we can discover the best form of government, it will bring maximal happiness to human beings. And quite frankly, I think we're living in to appreciate we've achieved something very close to that here in the United States, and it's worth knowing so that we can preserve it. And finally, just the idea of what I've already said again and again, the polis government only exists for the goodness or the happiness, i.e. the justice of the people. That the polis, it's not like, oh, there's a government and people have to fall into that form. The Greek idea of a polis, which again now becomes kind of a Western and an American idea, is it only exists to serve the people and their happiness. And if it's not doing that, it should be changed. And that's why you debate and look at the pros and cons of the different forms, because the government is a service to the people, the polis of the people. Okay, we'll be discussing those topics this week in class, and just bring in your notes so you actually have something to say and a starting point from which to engage in the material. All right, see you soon.